So we're going to look at background animation or background gradient animation using Framer Motion. So you see, I have a background gradient. It's not a solid color, and I'm able to animate it. If you have tried to do this with just CSS, you know it's not possible, or at least I don't know how to do it without creating add property rules, which is new and it's not supported in all the browsers. If you have seen the Tailwind version 4 video that we had on the channel, I talked about the new engine and the new additions or utilities inside Tailwind, specifically that they have rewritten the way Tailwind works or the way these CSS properties are defined by using the add property rule in CSS, which enables us to do a bunch more. And if you're using, or until that time that we are able to use Tailwind version 4 or the add property sign that allows us to easily animate background gradients, until that time, you can use Framer Motion to do it. I recently implemented this in a project and I thought I would just share it here. I don't know how much of a useful tip it would be, but let's just dive right in. So I have a simple Next.js app here. The link is in the description for the source code and for the finished version of our project. But let me walk you through what we have here, and then we're going to build this up from the scratch. So I have the regular layout. This is what comes out of the box when you install Next.js. This is working with TypeScript and Tailwind CSS. And inside of my homepage from a high level, I have this section with the heading, and then I have 3 buttons. Now, these buttons have an on-click handler, or they share the same click handler, which we're going to look at in a second. But they also have this data color attribute, which we're going to use to then change the primary color, a CSS variable that we have set, to then change the background. So on this section, as you can see, I'm using BG primary. And the way that I had done this is through CSS variables. So inside of my globals.css, this is where you can define your CSS rules. I've created the CSS variables for background, foreground, primary, and whatnot. These are RGB values. And then I'm using them inside my Tailwind config. Pretty regular Tailwind stuff. So I have defined or extended my colors to include my own custom colors. I'm using the RGB function and then the var to get the custom variables. And then this specific syntax allows me to also use the alpha values that come in Tailwind. So for example, you can go BG primary and then /50, which is going to change the opacity to 50. So this is a way to use that, and I've just extended my colors in Tailwind. So I can set the background color of my section like so with BG primary. Now we don't need CSS variables for this specific project, but I thought I also show it here. So the idea is that once we click on any of these buttons, I want to change the CSS variable, the color that I'm storing inside of this CSS custom variable. And then since I'm reading it here through Tailwind, it's going to change my background. So inside of this handle click, I'm getting the event. From the event, I'm reading this data color attribute, and then I'm getting a handle to my root element and then set this specific property to that new color that's coming from each of these buttons. So therefore, if I click on the green, it changes it to green, to pink, to purple. Now, it's easy to animate the background color change. You can just throw in a transition in Tailwind, specifically transition colors. We can also pass in a duration so we can see it better. Now, if I change to pink, not only the background changes because we're changing the CSS variable, but it also animates because we're using these transition colors, which is just setting a transition property in CSS to animate the background or all the colors in this case. Now, what if we wanted to use a background gradient? So instead of like a background color like so, what if I have a background gradient, let's say to bottom right, and let's say from, let's choose the same primary color, and then to, I have another color called muted, so I'm going to set it from this color to that color. Let's also keep the transition here, so let's save this up. Now if I change to green or to pink, I can see that it changes, so it is changing the background gradient, but the transition that we had or the animation doesn't work. In this transition color or duration doesn't work because you can't really transition background gradients in CSS. Now, the only way that I know how to do it in CSS is using the add property rule to define your CSS, and then you can animate or use transition on those. The add property rule is not, as I mentioned, supported in all the browsers. It is coming to Tailwind CSS because the version 4 of Tailwind CSS, it's now defining all the CSS rules in a different way using those add property rules that allows us to now animate the background gradients very easily. So if you haven't watched that video, I'll drop the link in the description so you can check it out. But until then, we're going to animate the background or the color using Framer Motion. Now, if you're not familiar with Framer Motion, it's a library from the Framer team that allows you to create motions and animations in React. Now, we're not going to dive deeper into Framer Motion. Probably I'm going to have tutorials coming up on the channel later on. But for now, we're going to use Framer Motion to create something that's called a motion value. So here inside the motion values, we have this use motion value that allows you to create a value that Framer Motion can work with, and you can then animate. And then you can set this on a style property of a motion tag like so, to then use that animated value. So the idea for us is to create a motion value that we can then animate between these different colors when the button is clicked, and then use that inside of our style tag for a motion tag or a section that's a motion tag. So let's see how we can do that. So inside of my function, I'm going to define a motion value. Let me just import this from Framer Motion. Now this is our primary or starting point for, now this is our primary RGB color. Now we're going to use this to create our background, which is a linear background. So this is a CSS rule. So I'm using this same primary to just write a CSS rule here. So I have linear gradient to bottom right. This is how you would create gradients in CSS. This is not Tailwind, so I'm using the RGB function, passing the primary color that I just defined up there as my motion value. And then this is my muted color, which is the second color that we're going to transit into. Now, to use a motion value inside of a template string like so, because motion values are not like your regular state, it is actually getting updated and animated outside the React re-render cycle. You need to use a hook called use motion template that allows you to interpolate a motion value into a string, just like how you would do a regular variable in JavaScript into a template string. For interpolating a motion value into a string, you can use this hook use motion template. So the idea now is to remove this from to primary and all the background gradient we used or we defined using Tailwind. Let's also remove the transitions from here. And now I'm going to give this a style tag. I can define my background over here and set it to the same value I created up there. Now, as it is now, it won't be able to read the properties inside of this background because we're using a motion value. So we need to turn this into a motion tag. So we're going to say motion that section. So all of your tags also come in with motion version of those same elements. Let's also import motion up top here. So now I have my motion section and I'm defining a background gradient using this background property that's reading from this use motion value, and I'm just setting a style background. Now, once we click on these buttons, the idea is to animate the value of our color from the color that currently is to the color that's coming in from here. So what I need to add here is just a function from Framer Motion that allows you to animate any motion value. So let me just import this up top. So I'm going to animate this primary motion value that we just created from whatever it currently is to the color that we got out of the button. And I'm also passing in a transition with a duration of 1 second so we can see this in motion. So let's go back to our application. Let's refresh our app. Now, if I click on the green, we can see it animates to a green background gradient, the pink also, and the purple. Now, again, in this specific example, I'm not using this CSS property anymore. I'm defining my variables up top here to get the RGB primary. This is the motion value, and I'm passing in the RGB values over here to use it inside of a inline style CSS tag. But if you're also using this primary color throughout your app for other stuff, you can also update it like so, so the rest of your app also responds correctly to this change. And that's a wrap for this video, folks. It was a short video learning how to use Framer Motion, which is an animation or motion library for React, to animate our background gradients, or really just the color, and then use it with an inline style tag inside of a motion tag that allows us to animate background gradients. Now, this doesn't stop here. There's a lot of more use cases with Framer Motion. I'm going to have more animation and Framer Motion specifically videos on the channel in near future, but definitely have a look at the library. It's pretty simple to use it. It also gives you the APIs and the hooks like the use motion value that we just saw together to really animate anything. We animated an RGB value in this case. You could use it for more stuff or become creative with it on top of your regular animations and transitions that you do in React. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.